Story 1. The first hour I spent with my husband during our second attempt at dating was pure joy. We had reconciled after 7 years and had never stopped thinking about one another. Story 2. Christmas morning last year. It must have been that. Nothing beats working your ass off all year, painstakingly wrapping gifts for weeks, battling the stresses of the holidays, and finally sitting back and watching your children's pure joy. Story 3. It was probably an hour of random bedtime activities when the children were younger and still relied on me for more than money and transportation. I missed the bedtime snuggles. Story 4. When my first daughter was 4 years old, we bought an old house. It was huge compared to the apartment we had lived in before. One evening, all three of us were sitting on the king-size bed in our bedroom. My little daughter, my wife, who was a couple of months pregnant with our second child, and me. Suddenly my daughter said there was a monster in the house and that we had to hide immediately. We played along and hid under the large blanket covering the bed. At first we were completely silent, but soon we started giggling and then laughing out loud. To this day, I am not quite sure why we laughed, but I can very clearly remember what I was thinking. I thought that this was love, this was happiness, and this was what was worth living for. It lasted only a few minutes, but for that short time there was nothing else, only us. To answer your question, I would not ask for an hour. I would ask only for that brief feeling of utter joy. Story 5. One of my favorite moments was getting my children to bed, reading them bedtime stories, and snuggling as their bedtime music played in the background. Story 6. The last walk I took with my dog before she passed away that night. Story 7. I would choose not to. For me, it would only reinforce that I was gone and no longer able to carry with me what mattered. It would hurt so much that I would rather let go than feel the pain. Story 8. I'd probably relive a simple moment with someone I love, maybe an hour laughing or just talking. Sometimes it's the small moments that stick with you the most. Story 9. My wedding does not include all the important people in my life in one place, but it comes very close. A small gathering with my loved ones. Story 10. I would go back to the last hour I held my daughter before she was cremated. She was full term and stillborn. I just want to hold her again. Story 11. The morning after I proposed, we were in Maui. I had popped the question at the top of Haleakala at sunrise. We spent the rest of the day calling friends and family while driving the Hana Highway to a remote campsite. The next morning, I woke up in a tent with my future wife beside me and walked to the edge of a field overlooking the ocean. I had never felt so proud and so grounded before. The catharsis of the previous day helped. Staring out over the waves, I began seeing dozens of waterspouts breaching the surface. It was humpback migration season, and they had chosen that morning to pass by our camp. It remains the most incredible moment of my life. Story 12. When I was 7, my family was on a rail trip through Canada. On the morning of June 20th, before dawn, my father woke me to ask if I wanted to see the sunrise with him in the observation car. I declined. If I could have that moment back, I would get up, get dressed, and go with him. I would then have been with him when he died of a massive heart attack 45 minutes later. Story 13. Seeing my wife after she had been on a ventilator for 16 days during coronavirus disease 2019, with everyone assuming she would not make it, was the worst time of my life. It was followed by the most joyous feeling I have ever felt. Story 14. By the second hour of my wedding reception, I had bonus babies but no biological children, so my kids were already there. My entire extended family and all of my best friends were present. My dad gave a beautiful speech and jumped around on the dance floor to the song Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, with all of his granddaughters. Nearly everyone I have ever loved was there in that moment. Story 15. A month ago, during movie night, I sat between my two teenagers on the couch. They both, as if by cue, rested their heads on my shoulders for the duration of the movie. Story 16. When my son was 10 months old, I spent Father's Day holding his hand and walking up and down the hall. That evening he took his first steps, walking solo across the room into my arms. Everyone watched, including my wife, my parents, my brother, and his family. We shouted with joy and were delighted as he kept showing off his new trick. I I savored every minute of that magic. Story 17. Some random hour at my favorite hotel water park with my then 4-year-old godsons. Pure happiness. Story 18. Helping my dad fix his father's car. I would relive every hour if I could. Story 19. Any night at all, I lie in the dark in my husband's arms as he strokes my hair, syncing my breath with his. Perfect peace. Story 20. When I found out the bar results, I opened my letter and read that I had passed. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. I had worked so hard for it. Story 21. A short weekend vacation with my family when my child was 5 or 6. We spent the day walking along Main Street with all the shops. Between each shop we held hands, and my child kept asking for the swing where my wife and I would swing him back and forth. He smiled up at us and laughed every time. Story 22. A golden hour playing with my 3 children in the community park in autumn, before they became too old to think it uncool. Story 23. One more hour with the dog I lost to old age a couple of months ago. Story 24. In October 2001, I watched Matilda with my grandmother, grandfather, and little brother. It was one of my grandmother's favorite movies. They are all deceased. Story 25. When I was 16, I felt alive and happy. Story 26. Christmas Eve 2024. I got engaged to the love of my life completely unexpectedly. I raced over to my mom's house to show her and tell my dad. My mom died 32 days later, also unexpectedly. I need to see her again. Story 27. It's a tie between the first date my wife and I went on and the last time I saw my best friend before he died. We had not seen each other in months, and we did not know it would be our last time together. At first, it was just the 2 of us before our other friends arrived. We had a deep conversation in which he told me I was one of only 2 real friends he had. He said he was going to turn his life around, get his general educational development certificate and his driver's license. It never happened. Story 28. The only thing that makes sense is eating at Korean barbecue. Cannot lie. Story 29. The hour that contains the majority of the people I loved in life. Story 30. It was probably one of those family dinners with everyone there. A home-cooked meal from my mom and casual conversation about nothing in particular. It was comforting. My mom passed away about a year ago, and I would give anything to have another one of those ordinary family dinners. Story 31. I once met a woman who gave me an oral experience that lasted more than 55 minutes and nearly made me pass out 3 or 4 times. Story 32. Can I split it? For the first 30 minutes, I held my sons after they were born. Story 33. It was definitely the morning of November 11th, 2011, when Skyrim came out. It was pure joy. Games were more exciting back then. Story 34. I would ask to relive an excruciating, stupid meeting and be happy to go into the void afterward. Story 35. I would choose 1 hour sitting in bed with my husband, our dog, and our 2 cats, watching TV, playing games on our phones, cuddling and eating snacks. We do this every night, and I always look forward to it. Story 36. I would spend 1 hour playing with my daughter, trying out wrestling moves in the World Wrestling Entertainment style on my bed. She would laugh loudly, showing her tiny, shark-like toddler teeth. Story 37. When my wife and I were still dating, we were on our way back home from a road trip. My 2 children were in the back seat. We spent an hour singing just about every song that came up on my playlist, mostly 90s classics. The children even joined in when they knew the songs. It was the happiest I have ever felt and probably the moment when I knew she was the one I would marry. Story 38. My first date with my ex was the homecoming dance. Afterward, we hung out at her house, cuddling on the couch and watching movies. Eventually, she fell asleep on my shoulder, and I could not bring myself to disturb her, so I remained in the same uncomfortable position all night. If I could relive 1 hour, it would be an hour of holding her that night. It was one of the happiest nights of my life. Story 39. I do not think there is any specific hour that stands out to me. I thank death for the offer but ask that my hour be passed to the next person. Story 40. A big mistake I made affected my entire life. I would do it again and be more careful. Story 41. I had a perfect day with friends this summer after 7th grade. There were about a dozen of us, boys and girls. We played all day Friday and decided to have a big sleepover. The girls stayed at one house and the boys stayed at another across the street. We were in the backyard until 11 in the evening, roasting marshmallows and talking. Then we went inside and talked until 2 in the morning, using a walkie-talkie and the house phone. I am almost 40, and that was probably the best day of my life. It was just a regular day, not a holiday or anyone's birthday, nothing special. Just a random Friday during the summer. I would pick almost any hour from that day. Story 42, my wedding. We eloped. I've never been so happy. Edited to add. Specifically the vows exchange moment, but I am not picky. Story 43. I would be with my brothers and tell them how much I love them forever. Story 44. One evening, an hour before bedtime, I read a story to my children. Turned out to be the last time and we did not know it. Story 45. Oh my lord, you're making me panic. That's a hard question. Story 46. I went home right after my first midterm exam and slept to gain energy to study for the next day's exam. At 5:30 in the evening my phone was flooded with university group texts saying the exam had been cancelled and we had 2 weeks off due to coronavirus disease 2019. I felt at the peak of my life. Story 47. I would play with my children and write letters to them for when they are older. Story 48. As a child on a summer day, I rode bicycles with my siblings and played on a giant fallen tree in the woods. Story 49. I would replay the under-10 soccer championship game in which my daughter won in overtime by bending a corner kicked straight into the net after practicing it all week. I was the head coach and my 15-year-old son was my assistant coach. All the players ran down the field to the bench, jumping up and down. My daughter ran to me, gave me the biggest hug, and said I did it. She had tears of joy in her eyes while my son celebrated with his teammates. Story 50. This was the conversation I had with my now wife when we first re-met. We had known each other for almost a decade. Our paths had crossed many times. We had many hour-long conversations. This time was different. Felt like the sunniest day. Everything was perfect, warm, and breezy. It was actually rather cold for March, but I couldn't feel it for that hour. I could not tell you a damn thing about what else happened during that hour unless it was about her. Her smile, her laugh, the way she tucked her hair, what we talked about, how easy it was to be honest, and how kind her eyes were when I was honest. I didn't even notice that my friend had been sitting on the curb for the better part of an hour, mostly because I could have sworn it was only a couple of minutes. That 1 hour decided everything. No question. Story 51. During the last hour of my first date with my girlfriend, we sat at Whole Foods Market, ate chocolate, and showed each other photos of the people in our lives. The whole date went well, but it was that last hour when I realized I wanted to be with her. Story 52. The day I took our sons to meet their baby sister is unforgettable. I still get emotional when I remember their faces and reactions. Story 53. There was a moment when it was just me, my 2 nieces, and my nephew, and it didn't really matter whose birthday it was. My wife and my brother-in-law and his wife were there too, along with a few others, but of all the people present, the 3 children chose to play with me. It was a moment of real love from them, and I hope to have more moments like that again. Story 54. Any hour lying on the couch with my cats sleeping peacefully on top of me is pure existential joy. Story 55. The hour before I go to bed is when my infant son cuddles with my wife, and our 2 cats insist on being right between us, expecting to be petted. It is the happiest moment of my day, and I am fortunate that it happens almost every night. Story 56. A day with my son when he remembered how much I loved him. A wonderful, fun day. Story 57. Sleeping in my mama's arms while being the little spoon. I miss you and love you, Mom. Story 58. Sunday morning bear hugs from my dad, who passed away in 2010. Story 59. The birth of my daughter after a long, hard journey to have her. Story 60. The hour we spent assembling Ingvar Kamprad Elmtred Gunnerid furniture together. arguing over which piece was which. Story 61. My favorite moments are tucking the kids into bed, talking and being silly with them for a while, and getting hugs and snuggles. Then spending some alone time with my wife, feeling in love. The best moments of my life. Story 62. I spent the last hour of Paul McCartney's 2022 Glastonbury set with my best mates at my favorite place in the world, watching the greatest living songwriter of all time. Story 63. Any stock market purchase that will make my son wealthy. Story 64. I think I'm choosing the 4th of July weekend fireworks in Chicago with my daughter, who was 7 at the time. We took the train for a long weekend in Chicago, just her and me. The whole visit was amazing and full of joy, love, and wonder. Story 65. This post made me really sad all of a sudden. Maybe it is a sign that many parts of my life have gone wrong. Thanks, original poster. Story 66. Snuggled in bed with my husband and daughter, watching a movie and giggling. It's no contest. Story 67. It was one of the larger family gatherings. Seeing my family's happiness again would give me some peace. Story 68. I remember the hour of the day my dad died. My parents and I had a really great day out. By the next morning he was gone, having died of a heart attack in his sleep. Story 69. I refuse to take that time. I cannot imagine living the last hour. Story 70. It was probably my oldest cousin's wedding. Most of my family was there. Story 71. Maybe the first time I was in bed with my wife, but more likely an hour on a lazy Sunday morning we spent lying with our baby this past year. Story 72. I would choose 1 hour when I am surrounded by the people I love most. Story 73. The hour I got married. What I remember at the moment we said I do is her bright, smiling face and shining, wet eyes. I cried more than she did. It was years ago, and I still get a little emotional thinking about marrying her. Story 74. The moment Bitcoin went public, I should have invested my life savings in it. Story 75. I would like to relive the hour before bed, when I usually read my Kindle. My partner watches short videos, and we hold hands with our legs tangled under the covers. It is the perfect hour. Story 76. 7 years ago, there was a moment I told myself to remember. I was lying in bed next to my husband and my cat. I have been divorced for 5 years, and my cat has been gone for the same amount of time. I wish I could relive that moment. Story 77. My dad and I are driving around Lake Tahoe and eating burgers with onion rings. Story 78. The first time my now fiancé and I met in person, we had convinced our families to go on vacation to the same place at the same time, and they let us roam the amusement park together by ourselves. It was wonderful. Story 79. One of the many times my best friend and I played full contact golf way back in the 90s was fun. Story 80. I would relive the first time I had sex with my wife to experience that first again, and see Star Wars at the drive-in in 1977 for the same reason. Story 81. The time when I was giving a head massage to my ex-girlfriend in bed, and she fell asleep on my chest. It is one of my warmest memories of us. Story 82. My first proper love interest and I had our first night together. It didn't work out, and I sometimes still think about her. Story 83. We took a trip to the zoo with my children and their friends just before the world shut down. Story 84. This is the time just before and just after I met my wife for the first time. It was 30 years ago when we were teenagers. Story 85. There was a moment while we were camping with some friends off the Idaho backcountry discovery route. All 3 trucks were working well. We were alone in the wilderness. The night was clear. Our stomachs were full. It was cool but not cold. There was a great fire, and the conversation was wonderful. All 4 dogs were exhausted, sleeping by the fire, and we were in pure, relaxed bliss. I think of that time often and consider it the most relaxing, happiest, and worry-free moment of my life. Story 86. I have 3 choices. Choice 1 is my wedding. Choice 2 is the birth of my son. Choice 3 is opening my Nintendo Entertainment System on December 25, 1991. Story 87. I would like to relive one of the many nights or mornings I have spent with my partner in our home. It does not matter which one. They are all perfect. Story 88. The moment my husband and I first realized we would be together. Story 89. Probably the time I did ecstasy in my friend's basement when we were 16. Story 90. I will take 6 minutes for the first dance with my wife at our wedding. Story 91. The half hour leading up to my first kiss with my partner and the half hour that followed. Story 92. When my husband, then boyfriend, told me he loved me, I felt a warm, overwhelming emotion because he broke through the emotional wall I had built after my divorce. Story 93. The first time I had sex, I felt like I only had 58 or 59 minutes of life left before I would be dead for good. Story 94. Right now, I am the happiest I have been since my recent breakup. That may not be my answer 6 months from now. Story 95. To knowingly relive any moment would fundamentally change it and everything afterward. Story 96. The last hour of the concert on September 3, 1988, at the Capitol Center. It was the last time Jerry Garcia performed Ripple Live and my first of many Grateful Dead concerts. Story 97. I often think about the hour surrounding my proposal to my wife. It has been almost 10 years, and I still remember it, especially on bad days. Remembering it pulls me out of a low mood. Story 98. Last weekend, after waking up, I lay in bed with my dogs, both of them in their favorite spots, as I petted them and watched a movie. It was the most peaceful, perfect moment for me. They both snored, content with life, especially my youngest, who had an abusive early life. Story 99. When my band played Swampfest, it was a pretty good hour. Story 100. 1 hour playing Mario Party with my son, husband, and friend, or 1 hour playing Mario Kart with my son. Story 101. This is probably one of the many family nights I have enjoyed with my wife and children. Their friendship and my marriage are my life's greatest gifts. Story 102. Holding my son in the neonatal intensive care unit for the only time he was alive, a few days before he passed. My husband and daughter were there. I felt complete. Story 103. The loss of my virginity is what I would say if I had experienced it. Story 104. Can I change the events of that 1 hour? If not, I have no interest in reliving a single hour of my life. If I can, I would save a life and spare myself nearly 40 years of guilt. Story 105. Who is telling me? I am going to punch them for an hour and relive it. They told me I had finally freed myself, but now I must do the life or death equivalent of visiting my parents. Story 106. When I met my best friend 3 years ago, I will never forget the sweater she was wearing in the empty hallway. Story 107. My wife and I took a culinary class on our honeymoon in Italy. We enjoyed delicious food, excellent wine, a warm atmosphere, and the love of my life at my side. Story 108. During my last camping trip with my parents, my sister, her husband, and their child, being around him made me put my pack of cigarettes away whenever I was about to light one because he would say, "Uncle, can you play with me?" I am convinced that if I lived closer, I would be able to quit much more easily. The trip this year was just great. The weather was terrible and we could not have a fire because of a fire ban, but it was still the best time. Story 109. On a Christmas vacation morning with my grandparents when I was about 12, Grandma made pancakes and bacon. Later, my grandfather and I hit the mountain before dawn for his retirement job as a volunteer ski patroller. Everything is okay. Story 110. When I come home from work, I am immediately showered with love by my dogs. Story 111. One last time with my parents and grandmother. I would like to observe them quietly and take it all in. This feels scary now. Story 112. A random carefree hour from childhood, with no stress at all. Story 113. Is it bad that I am choosing between several great sexual encounters? Story 114. My wedding day. I have never spent so much money in my life, but it was worth it to see everyone I loved so happy. Story 115. At the moment I die, the first time I will probably be too distracted, delirious, or overwhelmed to actually pay attention to what it feels like. The second time I could go into full analysis mode. Story 116. I want to relive that hour playing with my dog on the beach. She was such a good girl. I have only happy memories of her. I miss her every day and wish I could have her back. Story 117. I want to relive that hour playing with my dog on the beach. She was such a good girl. I have nothing but happy memories of her. I miss her every day and just wish I could have her back. Story 118. Can I split the hour? Half could be the first time I held my son. The other half could be the day my wife first told me she loved me. Story 119. That's hard to say. It would be an hour with someone from my past. But which person? I can only choose 1 hour. What happens after that hour is up. Story 120. I got up after falling in my 100-meter dash and then met the love of my life. Story 121. I already experienced it once and know what it was like. Reliving it will bring nothing good. I am dead. It is time for that now. Story 122. At my wedding ceremony, all my loved ones, including some who have since passed, were there. I cried when my wife walked down the aisle. It was the happiest moment of my life so far. Story 123. My wedding day included the last few moments of getting ready with my kids, my father walking me down the aisle, and marrying my husband. Then came hugs from my closest family and my best friend. My little girl ran to me with happy tears after we walked back down the aisle. It was the best hour ever. Story 124. The last time my whole family was together before my grandmother passed. I didn't realize it would be the last time we'd all laugh like that. I just wanted to sit in that warmth one more time. Story 125. Preschool. It would be so cool to see how different I used to be so long ago, since I cannot remember much besides bits and pieces. Story 126. Christmas 2008. I miss when my cousins and I were little girls and the world seemed so innocent. Story 127. I worked at a horrible company with a toxic culture, inadequate facilities, and a boss who was a bully. It was midsummer. The factory had been boiling hot all day, and I was working on the mezzanine, which was even hotter. I drove home with my shirt off, called my girlfriend, and said, "Get ready to go to the beach." We went straight there and floated on our backs in the sea, holding hands for what felt like a flash and enjoying the cool water. I would go there again without hesitation. We were young, poor, and far from home, but we had each other. In that moment, I knew it was one of the highlights of my life. Story 128. It was my final hour, so I could try to do things differently and not die. Story 129. During the second half of my first date with my wife, I realized I was going to marry her. I fell in love with her when I saw her at the bottom of the stairs in the restaurant where we met. 10 out of 10, I would relive that hour again. Story 130. The hour when she said yes, told me she liked me too, we started dating, and we talked without any limitations for once. Story 131. Louisville, September 2021. Metallica concert. My first concert and my first outdoor event after the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. I had just watched the Cincinnati Bengals beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was the 30th anniversary of the Black Album, so they played the whole album back to front. I was there with my childhood best friend. I was about 38 at the time. We smoked a one-hitter right before they started. It felt great. Metallica sounded fantastic. Once Metallica started ripping, I can't imagine a happier hour of my life. I'll never forget that feeling. Story 132. One Christmas Eve when I was a small child, before I was 10, perhaps 4 to 6 years old, my parents were not fighting. I was old enough to remember but not yet in school. As Germans, we opened presents on Christmas Eve after dinner. Everyone was there, my grandmother, my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my 3 sisters. Now only my sisters remain. My grandmother died when I was 10, my mother this year, and the others over the nearly 40 years since. I think last year was the last Christmas as a family. It would be nice to have one last cozy Christmas Eve with everyone together and happy. I could see the dog and cat I grew up with, and the other cat that came later. That would be nice too. Thanks, Reddit, for making me sad now, laughing out loud. Story 133. I would want to have 3 to 5 moments that were a few minutes each. 1. The first time I held my son. 2. The time we came home and he asked if I had a good day. Then he asked me if I was proud of him. He had been having a rough time in school and was trying very hard not to get in trouble. He was around 5 at the time. I told him I would always be proud of him, and he gave me a big hug. 3. The first kiss I had with the only person from whom I have ever felt true love. 4. Either the first time I met her or the first time I told her I loved her. 5. 5 more minutes with my bulldog, Winston. I was not able to be home when he had to be put to sleep because I was out of town working. I had to video call him the night before. Story 134. It makes me sad that I cannot think of a single memory that stands out. I had good times, but none are more memorable than the others. I have never achieved my dreams. Story 135. I would watch Mean Girls. It is 90 minutes, so I would have an extra 10 minutes. Story 136. The first one that comes to mind is when I was 21 years old. I biked without a phone or a map to a neighboring town. I spent the day biking around and ended up near a stream in the woods in the early evening. I lay down fully clothed in the stream. The water reached about halfway up my body. It was cool, clear, and clean. I closed my eyes and felt the joy of being young, strong, and free. Story 137. I am sitting on the hill with purple grass waving in the gentle breeze. The Feudalifer River roaring on my left, Machete to my north, the sun shining above me, and the Choo-Chow Tapaculos singing. Story 138. In December 1983, I had recently met a young woman at college and we got along well. She was from out of town and asked me to help her find a store she wanted to visit. We arrived at the building and rode an escalator. She stood one step ahead of me and was considerably shorter. She turned to face me. We were eye to eye. She leaned in and we kissed. We graduated, moved across the country for jobs, got married, and bought a house. While we were trying to start a family, she was diagnosed with cancer. I lost her 6 months later. All I want is enough time for an escalator ride. Story 139. I have had many sexual experiences, but one encounter with my former partner while we were traveling in India was sublime. Although it lasted well over an hour, I would give an hour to return to that moment. Story 140. That one time I got to hold my newborn child while he was still alive. Story 141. Does it have to be the previous continuous hour? Or can I combine several 10-minute segments? Story 142. August 2017. A particular hour at a Hilton with an ex with whom I was desperately in love. The hour before we left. Story 143. If I could relive one moment for an hour, it would be when my wife rounded the corner on our wedding day. That was, hands down, the happiest moment yet. It made me realize it was real. Story 144. The drive home from the shelter with my wife, our kitten, and our young children was full of joyous giggles and comical meows. Story 145. Watching a solar eclipse in the path of totality with my family. Story 146. Sitting in a boat on a Canadian lake with my dad. Any of those hours would be great. Story 147. This was my first date with my husband. He took me home. Yes, I was that kind of girl. Sue me. He showed me around his home and we ended up in the bedroom. He kissed me, and it was the most perfect kiss I have ever had. We had sex and then played Call of Duty Zombies. Felt perfect. We have such a beautiful life together. Story 148. I had bad post-party blues, and my ex picked me up early in the morning. The storm outside was wild. I sat on the shower floor in the dark with hot water pumping, yet I could still hear the rain and thunder over the shower. She came in, sat with me, washed me, and cuddled me. We stayed there for about 2 hours. The intimacy and connection I felt in that moment was like a rush of dopamine. Nothing else mattered. It was the only time since I was a child that I have truly felt at peace and content. I am over my ex, but I would give anything for that moment again. Story 149. Am I aware that I am about to die within an hour? If so, I am not sure I would be able to enjoy it. Otherwise, it would be a sweet puppy love moment. Story 150. We were in Thailand on a boat trip to a nearby island. The boat was leaking, very narrow and long, with a motor on a pole at one end. It was a bit terrifying. Anyway, my now husband got in and said, "I've never been on anything so dangerous." Quickly responded, "I don't know. I've met your ex-wife. Crude, I know, but justified. While we have a better relationship with her now, back then it really couldn't have been worse. Although she had no sense of humor, I think she would have enjoyed being called dangerous." We spent the next half hour laughing, then walked on the beach in the warm sunshine, where I found him a tiny sand dollar shell neither of us had seen before. I choose that hour. Story 151. Anyone reading this thread should consider watching the Japanese film Afterlife, which addresses this exact question. It is quite moving and explores the most important memories from your life. Story 152. One specific time when my daughter was 4 years old, we went to the park in the fall. She played, we ran around the track, and we hugged and cuddled on a bench. A little while later she said, "Daddy, it's time to go." I told her I didn't want to go. She turned and said, "It's time to go," and started running toward home. This hit me hard because I had a dream years before that day in the park. I was in a bed, my deathbed to be exact, in a white room with beautiful stained wainscoting. My daughter left the room I was in, couldn't tell her age. 3 other people followed her out. I did not know who they were. I could hear the conversation in the hallway. It went like this: "You need to get in there and say goodbye to your father." Her reply was, "I don't want him to go." One of the other people, a female voice, said, "He has done so much for you. He's suffering and he's refusing to pass. You need to help him and tell him it's okay." My daughter's reply was, "I can't do this. It's too much." Sometime later she came into the room, held my hand, and told me, "Daddy, it's time to go." I replied, "But I don't want to go." She said, "It's time to go." I presumably passed away shortly after. Did I see my own death? Maybe. I've only ever told this story to one other person, my mother, and she bawled her eyes out when she heard it. That day in the park, I was crying as I followed her home, remembering my dream from years before. Story 153. I remember eating a perfect tomato with salt when I was a kid. Story 154. Going to Otakon with my sister in 2019 was one of my best memories. She had moved to Missouri a few years earlier, and I had not been able to see her. Conventions have changed a lot, but we got along better than we ever had. We understood each other so well and knew what we wanted to do. I bought one of my favorite anime figures at that convention. I had the most fun of my life and felt at peace. I think about it a lot. I miss her so much and would do anything to be in that moment again. Story 155. When I was 11, probably at Christmas, my brothers had not discovered alcohol yet. My parents were alive and I was my younger brother's sissy. Now he hates me for living. Story 156. Any of the hours I spent playing with my children. Story 157. I would split that hour into 3 20-minute sessions to play with each of my children when they were toddlers. Story 158. The last time I saw my grandma fully conscious and aware was when she was with her family. Or maybe it was my little sister's wedding. I was the man of honor. We had a great dance and many good memories. The whole day was really special. Story 159. I wouldn't need the hour. My Nana is the one I'd want. And if there's anything after I die, I know she's already waiting for me there. What's an hour to forever? Story 160. The hour right before a big happy memory, just to feel it again. Story 161. I spent a few hours sitting on the beach in Jamaica with my fiancé a day or so before we married. It was around 3 in the morning, the sky was cloudless, and the temperature was about 77 degrees. We were comfortably buzzed on Red Stripe and whatever else the locals suggested. In that moment I thought that everything could end and I would be okay with it. Many moments since have approached that feeling, but if I could have 1 hour back, it would be that one. Story 162. If it ever existed, it was a dinner with both my parents where everyone got along. Story 163. I was hanging out with my first love and remembering the way he looked at me. I go back to that too often lately. I need to make more memories. I have seen the same look from 5 other guys and a few girls, but I do not really count the girls. The most recent guy was a few weeks ago. I do not know how many people I look at that way. I think everyone laughing out loud. I stopped making eye contact. Now my ex and I are back together. Story 164. Watching Spider-Man. No Way Home in the theater for the first time and seeing Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield return. Especially Tobey cemented this message for me. Miracles can happen. Story 165. The first thing that came to mind was the very first date I had with my wife. We were at a restaurant, and I made her laugh the whole time, not caring whether our food was on time or what was happening outside our little bubble at the booth where we sat. Story 166. The time when you know you're falling in love with your future wife, without a care or stress in the world. Story 167. One of those hours when I was lying on the couch with my husband's arm around me, holding our baby, dogs asleep on my legs. I knew those were precious times, but they still went by so fast. Story 168. Probably a small happy moment with my mother. Seeing her one last time before whatever happens after death would make me happy. Story 169. I am at my mother's graduate school commencement. I am so proud that she went back to school in her late 50s. Story 170. I am torn between two. 1. The first date between my fiancé and me. We met for coffee or tea and roamed a park in my hometown before settling on a bench near the pond in the center. We talked for hours. She was a breath of fresh air. Genuine, kind, sophisticated, intelligent, and beautiful. I had ended a short but brutally challenging situation with another woman a few months earlier, and I surprised myself when I scheduled the date, because I was still emotionally damaged. When we parted that night, I texted my family group chat to tell them I had found the woman I was going to marry. 7 years later, we are engaged. I would want to tell her about our incredible life and the relationship we built. Our careers, vacations, families, pets, and more. It would be selfish, but I would need her to know how important she would become to me. 2. My family often gathers for dinner to celebrate Christmas at a nice restaurant a week or two into the new year, as a way to be together without the distractions of cooking or distant relatives. It is lovely. I would choose one year in particular when my fiancé was there, along with my niece and nephew, the core people who mean the most to me. We laughed, ate great food, and forgot about the world for a few hours. If I am to be gone forever, I cannot think of a better or more important group of people to be with as the minutes count down. Story 171. During the first hour in the hotel room after my wedding, my wife and I finally ate a picnic-style dinner that the venue wisely packed and sent home. We did the obvious and then fell asleep in what might be the most comfortable bed I have ever been in. Story 172. This summer I was on vacation with my family, and one afternoon we went for a very mellow banana boat ride. The kids were 4 and 2.5. I had never seen them this excited about anything, and they still talk about it a lot. I would relive that. Story 173. The moment my life changed was the first hour I spent hanging out with the woman who is now my wife. Story 174. I would pick one of those summer mornings from my teens. I was off school for the summer, had been working for a few weeks, and had some money in my pocket. I had plans: tennis, golf, or football with friends, and a barbecue in the evening. No worries or responsibilities. I remember the carefree optimism I felt when I woke on those summer mornings. It has been a while since I felt that. Story 175. I'm really sorry you're feeling so overwhelmed and hopeless. Are you safe right now? Do you have a plan to hurt yourself? If you are in immediate danger, call your local emergency number now. If you are in the United States or Canada, you can call or text 988 for immediate crisis support. If you are in the United Kingdom, you can call Samaritans at 116 123. If you are elsewhere, please contact your local emergency services or search for befrienders worldwide to find local crisis lines. If you'd like, I can help rephrase your sentence for Azure text-to-speech to convey strong distress without encouraging self-harm. Example: I feel completely overwhelmed and don't know how to keep going. Story 176. When I was a teenager, my dad and I visited a state park together. It is my best memory of him before he passed 2 years ago. Story 177. An early morning from my childhood on my grandparents' farm. I was alone. The morning was misty and the sun was rising after I had tended the cows. I stopped and watched the sun come up. Pink, orange, and lavender spread across the neighbors' fields and hills. A gentle breeze made the willow trees sway and the wind chimes on the porch sing. I could hear a distant freight train horn echoing from miles away and crickets nearer by. The temperature was perfect, and the air smelled of wildflowers and warm dirt. I must have been 10. Now I am 32 and still remember trying to bottle that exact moment because I recognized its ephemeral beauty even then. My grandparents and the farm are gone now, but I will hold them and that place forever. Story 178. That moment when the love of my life was supposed to go back to the dojo to continue training, but we lost track of time and talked for 8 hours until sundown, knowing we had fallen in love without saying it. Story 179. That Coldplay concert would drag on so long it would feel like another lifetime. Story 180. The day I met the girl of my dreams. She looked perfect and her smile was beautiful. Story 181. Like, relive it exactly as it was, or can I make it better? Laugh out loud. Story 182. The main event of All Elite Wrestling All in 2024 features Bryan Danielson versus Swerve Strickland. The final countdown. The All Elite Wrestling World Championship held by Swerve Strickland versus the career of Bryan Danielson. Story 183. For a number of reasons, I was not able to be with my other boys. This was the most magical moment of my life to date. I cannot imagine anything I would want more. Story 184. The day I asked my now fiancée to be my girlfriend was unforgettable. We were ice skating. It was cold and wintry, and romantic music was playing. The ice rink had many different lights. I remember seeing her under a purple light as we skated. She was so beautiful. It was then I realized I had utterly fallen in love with her. That is the scene I want to relive. It was as if a whole new spectrum of colors was added to my life. Story 185. Nothing. If it is my time, there is no need for me to delay the next step. Story 186. My finest hour. Refuse to elaborate and see what happens. Story 187. All of these are so wholesome. I'm choosing the three-way I had with the two hot black women. Story 188. I would trade anything for an hour with my boyfriend from childhood and college, who passed away when we were 22. I am 33 years old now. Living without him has become increasingly painful over the years. Story 189. Last year I sat on the porch of the cabin I had rented on the Miramichi River, watching deer walk along the riverbank as the sun set. I had a mug of hot chocolate butter tarts and a good book beside me. My sister sat in the other chair with a mug of tea and her own book. Story 190. The moment my husband asked me to marry him over dinner in Rome was unforgettable because of the love and because of the pizza and gelato. Story 191. During the last hour of our backyard wedding reception, all my closest friends were hanging out under the stars, eating soft pretzels and laughing. Story 192. The first hour my wife and I held our daughter. Sure, it was in the neonatal intensive care unit, but it was magical. Story 193. This was the birth of my third child. My oldest daughter was 4.5 and cut the cord. My middle child was the first, after me, to hold his baby sister. It was the first time all four of us were together, and my mother was there. She is no longer with us. Story 194. Riding on the shoulders of my father in the forest, collecting mushrooms and sticks. Story 195. During the first hour after I retired, the drive home felt like driving on cloud 9. Story 196. Can I change it or only relive it? The answer changes drastically depending on that. Story 197. It happens consistently now. My kids and I call it Big Bed. Big Bed is when I drag my mattress into the living room to cozy up and watch movies or shows together on a Friday or Saturday night. The first time we did it, we made popcorn and watched E.T., the extraterrestrial. My kids were so into it and had such a great time. Seeing their ear-to-ear grins and hearing their laughter both broke me and made my year. They got a bit sad too, and I got to console them. For a struggling single dad, it's moments like these, core memories, that carry me. 1 hour was heaven. Story 198. A calm, happy hour playing with my daughter at an age she will remember forever. Story 199. That one moment when I did not have the courage to ask the girl who was really into me to be more than just friends with benefits. The whole scene felt like a cheesy Hollywood film. A cold winter day, fresh snow everywhere, and we sat on a bench in the park. I would love to punch my younger self really hard right now. Story 200. I spent time in the car with my dad. We always sang and had Mimi concerts. I miss him so much. Story 201. The one where I rode my bicycle with my late grandmother. It was the only time we ever rode, and I wish I could do it again. Story 202. A slow morning in bed with my partner and our dogs, or at the beach with my partner, my brother, and our dogs. Story 203. One of our early dates was when my wife and I made out on the couch for an hour. Story 204. The hour I knew I was going to marry my wife happened when we were in St. Petersburg as a family. This sticks with me because of how innocent and fun it was. Even if it lasted only an hour, it was a solid time for all of us together. Sure, there are Christmases and other holidays, but they are often overwhelming and not as controlled as you remember. This was extremely carefree. Story 205. I do not have an answer, but this thread is making me feel much more appreciative of my family and is a good reminder to get the snuggles in while you can with your kids. Story 206. I would say when my son was born, it was the best day of my life by far, and even after 10 years I have never been happier. Story 207. The last time I visited my sister was in 1989. She died in a car accident in January 1990. Story 208. I would love to watch Christmas films or specials with my mom on Boxing Day one more time. Story 209. When I adopted my second cat, I knew we would have many good times together. I wish I could go back and savor the moment we met one more time. Story 210. I choose a random family reunion from my childhood. No one I knew had died yet, and I'd get to see everyone gathered and smell the air of my grandparents' backyard one last time. Story 211. When my son was a newborn, we were sitting on the beach with my spouse and our dog. I said in the moment that I knew it would be one of the best moments of my life. My beloved dog died a few months later, and a few months after that a hurricane destroyed our home. That moment and the happiness were snatched away. Story 212. A hike with my wife and our dogs. They are older now, so they do not come with us on longer or more challenging trails, but in their prime they would be dragging us up mountains. Seeing their pure joy in the woods, with all the smells, rolling in the mud, and meeting other people, was an incredible experience. If I had to pick one place where we took them, it would be the mountains of New England. We never hiked above the treeline at sunrise with them, and I would give anything for that chance now. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.